In the dusty frontier town of Redemption Creek, where tumbleweeds dance across abandoned streets and the sun beats down mercilessly on weathered wooden buildings, an ordinary cowboy named Jake Morrison made a choice that would forever change the course of history. When alien warriors descended from the stars, bringing with them a fugitive princess accused of crimes against their empire, Jake never imagined that 10 lashes of a whip would transform him from a nameless drifter into a legend whispered across galaxies. This is the story of sacrifice, honor, and the unlikely bond between a human outcast and an extraterrestrial royal, a tale of how one man's compassion sparked a revolution that would shake the foundations of an interstellar civilization. What compelled Jake to step forward that fateful day? Why did the alien warriors kneel before him at dawn? The answers lie in a journey that defies the boundaries between worlds and redefines the meaning of courage itself. The afternoon sun hung like a copper coin in the pale Arizona sky when the ship arrived. Jake Morrison had been shoeing his Maury behind the livery stable when the shadow fell across Redemption Creek, massive and impossible, blocking out the light with its otherworldly presence. The craft descended without sound, a feat that unsettled Jake more than the ship's arrival itself, something that large should have roared like thunder. Yet it moved with the silence of a hawk's shadow. Within minutes, the entire town had gathered in the main street, a collection of weathered ranchers, shopkeepers, and saloon girls staring upward with mouths agape. Jake pushed through the crowd, his calloused hands still smelling of horse and metal, his leather vest dusty from a morning's work. He'd seen many strange things in his 32 years, riding the frontier dust storms that swallowed entire homesteads, lightning that struck the same spot 7 times, men driven mad by desert heat. But nothing had prepared him for this. The ship's hull opened like a flower of polished silver, and they emerged. 7 warriors, each standing nearly 8 feet tall, their skin an iridescent blue-green that shifted in the sunlight like oil on water. They wore armor that seemed to be grown rather than forged, organic curves and plates that moved with their bodies like a second skin. Their faces were humanoid enough to read expression, but alien enough to inspire fear. Elongated skulls, eyes like pools of mercury, mouths that held too many teeth. Between them stumbled a smaller figure, bound in chains that glowed with an inner light. She was clearly of their species, but different, more delicate. Her skin a lighter shade of turquoise, her eyes holding flecks of gold that caught the desert sun. Her clothing, though torn and stained, bore the unmistakable marks of royalty. Intricate patterns woven with threads that seemed to capture starlight, symbols that spoke of authority and lineage. She held her head high despite her chains, despite the bruises darkening her cheekbones, despite the fear Jake could see trembling in her hands. The lead warrior, broader than the others, with a crest of bone rising from his skull like a crown, stepped forward and addressed the crowd in perfect English, though his voice carried harmonics that no human throat could produce. Humans of this settlement, we are the sentinels of the Krill Empire. We pursue a criminal, a traitor to our people. She has fled across the stars to your primitive world, seeking refuge among your kind. According to the treaties your governments have secretly signed with our empire, we have jurisdiction to carry out justice wherever our fugitives are found. The crowd murmured, fear and fascination mixing in equal measure. Jake found himself studying the prisoner's face, watching as she scanned the gathered humans with desperate hope, as if searching for something or someone who might understand her plight. This one, the sentinel continued, his massive hand gesturing toward the girl, is Princess Lyra of the 7th House, daughter of the rebel commander who seeks to overthrow our rightful emperor. She has been sentenced to public punishment before execution, 10 lashes with the Norrel whip, so that all may witness the price of treason. The Princess Lyra finally spoke, her voice musical despite its desperation. Please, you must listen. My father fights against a tyrant who enslaves entire species, who destroys worlds that refuse to submit. I carry proof of his crimes, evidence that could. A sentinel's backhand sent her sprawling to the dirt, chains jangling. Blood, crimson as any human's, trickled from her lip. Jake felt something twist in his chest, anger he recognized from his past, from years he'd tried to forget. He'd seen injustice before, worn its scars on his back, carried its weight in his heart. He'd sworn never to be the man who looked away again. The Sentinels erected a post in the town square with disturbing efficiency, their technology making the thick wooden beam rise from the ground as if grown in seconds. They chained Lyra to it, her back exposed, the delicate scales of her skin gleaming in the harsh sunlight. The lead sentinel produced a neural whipper weapon that looked like living lightning contained in a handle of dark metal. "The first strike," the sentinel announced, raising the whip high. "Wait." Jake's voice cut through the silence, surprising even himself. He stepped forward, his boots kicking up dust, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Wait just a damn minute." The sentinel turned those mercury eyes upon him, expression unreadable. "You would interfere with Krill justice, human?" Jake swallowed hard, aware of every eye upon him, human and alien alike. "I would. Where I come from, a man doesn't stand by and watch someone get beaten who can't defend themselves, especially not a woman. If those lashes need to fall on someone, double quotes." He took another step forward, his jaw set. "Then let them fall on me instead." The silence that followed Jake's declaration stretched like taffy, pulling tighter and tighter until it felt ready to snap. The crowd behind him erupted in whispers, some calling him a fool, others a hero, most simply shocked into disbelief. Old Tom Bradley, the blacksmith, actually removed his hat as if attending a funeral. Perhaps he was. Princess Lyra's golden-flecked eyes went wide, her mouth forming words in her native tongue that needed no translation. She was telling him no, pleading with him not to do this. But Jake had already committed, had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd learned long ago that the moments defining a man's character were the ones where walking away would be easier. The lead sentinel studied him with an expression that might have been curiosity or contempt, tilted his massive head, and made a sound that could have been laughter or a growl. "You understand what the neural whip does, human? It is not merely pain. It reaches into the nervous system, sets every nerve ending ablaze simultaneously, makes the victim feel as though their very cells are tearing apart from the inside. Most beings lose consciousness after 3 strikes. Some die before the 10th. Then you'd better hope I'm tougher than most," Jake replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. The sentinel regarded him for a long moment, then spoke to his companions in their clicking, harmonic language. The other warriors seemed to argue, gesturing at Jake, at Lyra, at their ship. Finally, the leader turned back to Jake and spoke. "Very well, human. By the laws of substitution in our code, a willing volunteer may bear another's punishment if they are deemed worthy of the burden. We will test your worthiness." Before Jake could ask what that meant, 2 sentinels moved with blurring speed, grabbing him and dragging him to the post. They released Lyra, who stumbled away from the wooden beam, tears streaming down her face as she watched them chain Jake in her place. His shirt was torn from his back, exposing skin already cross-hatched with old scars, remnants of a past he'd never fully explained to anyone in Redemption Creek. The lead sentinel noticed those scars and made an approving sound. "You have known suffering before. Good. Perhaps you will survive after all." Jake gripped the post, his knuckles white, and caught Lyra's eyes one last time. She had collapsed to her knees in the dirt, her chains pooling around her, her expression a mixture of gratitude and horror. He tried to smile, to show her it would be all right, though they both knew it was a lie. The first strike hit like the wrath of God. Jake had been shot once, taken a bullet through the shoulder during a range war down in Texas. He'd had his arm broken by a Mustang's kick, had survived pneumonia and scorpion stings and knife fights in dark alleys. Nothing, Absolutely nothing had prepared him for this. The neural whip didn't just hurt his back where it landed. It hurt everywhere at once. Every muscle seized. Every tooth felt like it might shatter. Every bone seemed to vibrate at a frequency that threatened to tear him apart from the inside. His vision went white, then black, then red. He heard himself scream, a sound that didn't seem to come from his own throat. When the first wave subsided, leaving only its echoes of agony, Jake was gasping, his entire body trembling against the post. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with dirt and tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. His back felt like someone had laid a brand along his spine, but he knew that was only the beginning. 1, the sentinel announced. 9 remain. The second strike came before Jake had fully recovered from the first. This time he was ready for the initial impact, but that preparation meant nothing. The neural whip found new pathways of pain to explore, new ways to convince his body that it was dying. His legs gave out, leaving him hanging by the chains, his full weight pulling against his bound wrists. Through the haze of agony, Jake heard the crowd. Some had turned away, unable to watch. Others stood transfixed, witnessing something they detail their grandchildren about, the day a cowboy took a beating meant for an alien princess. He heard Mrs. Chun from the general store praying in Cantonese, heard young Billy Thornton crying, heard the saloon girls gasping with each strike, and he heard Lyra speaking in her musical language, her voice rising and falling like a song of mourning. The third strike made Jake vomit, his body rejecting the pain in the only way it could. The fourth made him bite through his lip, blood filling his mouth with the taste of copper and salt. The fifth brought darkness creeping at the edges of his vision, unconsciousness beckoning like a merciful friend. But Jake held on. He held on because Lyra was watching, because the town was watching, because somewhere deep in his soul he needed to prove that he was more than the broken man who'd drifted into Redemption Creek 5 years ago, more than the coward he'd once been when it mattered most. The sixth strike took him to a place beyond pain, where his mind separated from his body and watched from somewhere distant and cold. He saw himself hanging from the post, saw the crowd of familiar faces twisted in sympathy and horror, saw the sentinels standing like statues of judgment. He saw Lyra and realized she was no longer just crying, she was singing, a haunting melody that seemed to wrap around him like a protective blanket, trying to give him strength. 7, 8, 9. After the ninth strike, Jake couldn't remember his own name. He couldn't remember where he was or why this was happening. All that remained was the knowledge that he had to hold on for one more, just one more, because someone was depending on him, because surrender was not an option written into his bones. The 10th strike felt like the ending of the world. When it finally released him, Jake hung limp in the chains, his consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. He was dimly aware of hands releasing him, of his body being lowered to the ground. The dirt against his cheek felt cool and welcoming. He heard voices, human and alien, but couldn't make sense of the words. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Lyra's face above his own, her golden eyes streaming with tears that fell onto his skin like rain, her lips moving in words he couldn't hear but somehow understood. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Jake woke to a world made of starlight. He was lying on something soft, not the hard ground of Redemption Creek's main street. The air smelled raw, clean, and cool, with a faint metallic tang that reminded him of the moment before lightning strikes. His back throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that was somehow manageable, nothing like the apocalyptic agony he'd last remembered. When his eyes finally focused, he found himself staring at a ceiling that shifted and flowed like liquid silver, patterns moving across its surface in hypnotic waves. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, a wave of dizziness sending him back down onto the cushioned surface. Please, remain still. Lyra's voice came from somewhere to his right. The healing matrix has only just begun its work. Moving too quickly could disrupt the cellular regeneration. Jake turned his head slowly and found her sitting beside what he now recognized as some kind of medical pod, her face clean of dirt and blood, her chains removed. She wore different clothing, now simple but elegant, the color of deep ocean water. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow smudges, nearly healed. Where ... double quotes, Jake's voice came out as a croak. He tried again. Where am I? Aboard the Sentinel ship, Lyra replied, offering him a cup of something luminescent. Please, drink. It will help with the pain and accelerate your recovery. Jake took the cup with trembling hands and sipped. The liquid tasted like honeyed starlight, if such a thing could exist, sweet and complex and utterly alien. Almost immediately, warmth spread through his chest, and the throbbing in his back diminished to a distant echo. What happened? He asked. After the last strike, everything went black. Lyra's expression softened, something like wonder crossing her features. Something extraordinary happened, Jake Morrison. Something that hasn't occurred in 3,000 years of Krill history. Before she could explain further, the chamber door opened with a sound like wind chimes. The lead sentinel entered, his massive form seeming to fill the room despite its generous size. He regarded Jake with those mercury eyes, and for the first time, Jake saw something other than cold judgment in that alien gaze. He saw respect. You survived, the sentinel said, his harmonic voice somehow gentler than before. Not only survived, but remained conscious until the final strike. You did not beg, did not plead, did not attempt to escape your bonds. You bore the punishment with honor. The alien warrior did something Jake never expected. He placed his right fist over his heart, a gesture that transcended species. I am Krelvar, first sentinel of the Emperor's Guard, and I must tell you something that will change everything you thought you knew about this day. Jake struggled to sit up again, this time managing it with Lyra's help. I don't understand. I took the punishment. Isn't the princess free to go now? Krelvar made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. Free? No, human? The punishment was for treason against the Empire, a crime punishable by death. The 10 lashes were merely the prelude to execution. All you did was spare her the pain before the end. He paused, watching Jake's face carefully. Or at least, that was what should have happened. Then why is she here, healed and unchained? Jake demanded, anger giving him strength despite his injuries. Because of what you did, you've invoked an ancient law, older than the Empire itself, older than most of our recorded history. Lyra spoke now, her voice trembling with emotion. It's called the Rite of Arkith, the debt of blood. When someone willingly suffers great harm to protect another, without hope of reward or recognition, purely from compassion and honor, they create a bond that supersedes all other laws, even imperial decree. Krelvar nodded slowly. We Sentinels are warriors, bound by codes so ancient they are written into our very genetics. We can no more ignore the Rite of Arkith than we can stop our hearts from beating. By taking the princess's punishment upon yourself, by enduring all 10 strikes without breaking, you have claimed her under your protection. She is now bound to you, and we are forbidden from harming her without first killing you, something we cannot do to one who has proven himself through the rite. Jake looked between them, his mind struggling to process this information. So ... she's safe? Just like that? Not exactly, Lyra said quietly. The rite doesn't grant freedom, it transfers responsibility. I'm now under your protection, yes, but that means you're responsible for me. Where you go, I must follow. Your enemies become my enemies. Your battles become my battles. We are bound until either you release me or one of us dies. And there's more, Krelvar added, his tone turning grave. The Rite of Arkith requires that we, the Sentinels, acknowledge you as one worthy of honor. We must spread word of what you've done throughout the Empire. The Emperor himself will hear of this day, and he will not be pleased. Jake absorbed this, his mind racing. So I've painted a target on my back. A target the size of a star system, Krelvar confirmed. The Emperor does not tolerate those who interfere with his justice, especially not primitive humans from backwater planets. He'll send assassins, bounty hunters, perhaps even an entire fleet to retrieve the princess and punish you for your defiance. Then I'll face them, Jake said simply. Won't be the first time I've had powerful enemies. Something changed in Krelvar's expression, a shift that Jake couldn't quite read. The sentinel turned to his companions, who had been standing silently by the door, spoke to them in their clicking language, and received a series of responses that sounded heated, argumentative. Finally, Krelvar turned back to Jake and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. At dawn, when your people gather to see what has become of you and the princess, my warriors and I will kneel before you, Jake Morrison. We will acknowledge the right publicly, declaring you a person of honor in the eyes of the Krill Empire. This will offer you some protection, not from the Emperor, but from honorable warriors who might otherwise hunt you. Many will refuse to pursue someone who has been acknowledged by sentinels. You'd risk the Emperor's anger for me? Jake asked, genuinely shocked. Why? Krelvar was silent for a long moment, his mercury eyes distant, as if seeing across vast stands of time. Because 3,000 years ago, my ancestor was the last person to invoke the right of Arketh. He did so to protect the child from an unjust execution, and the sentinels of that age acknowledged him. That acknowledgement sparked a rebellion that nearly toppled the empire, but it also reminded our people that honor must sometimes stand above law. I am the last of his bloodline, and I will not let the memory of that courage die with me. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Rest tonight, human. Tomorrow, everything changes, for you, for the princess, and perhaps for the empire itself. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek like a wound in the sky, red and gold bleeding across the horizon. Jake stood in the main street, his back still tender beneath fresh bandages that Lyra had applied using both krill technology and supplies from Doc Henderson's office. The entire town had gathered again, drawn by rumors that had spread through the night like wildfire. The cowboy who took the alien whipping was still alive, and something impossible was about to happen. Jake could feel their eyes on him, could hear the whispered conversations that stopped when he looked their way. Mrs. Chun had brought him a plate of eggs and cornbread at first light, tears in her eyes, calling him a hero in her broken English. Young Billy Thornton had asked for his autograph, as if Jake were some kind of celebrity. The saloon girls had offered things he politely declined. Everyone wanted to touch him, to be part of whatever legend was being born. But Jake felt no heroism in his heart, only annoying anxiety about what came next. Lyra stood beside him, and he'd begun to see her more clearly now, to understand the weight she carried. She'd told him her story through the night, speaking in that musical voice about a father who discovered terrible truths about the empire, about forced assimilations and genocides disguised as peaceful integrations, about entire species erased because they refused to submit. My father was the Emperor's most trusted general, she'd explained, her golden eyes reflecting the strange lights of the medical equipment. He won 100 victories for the throne, conquered 50 systems in the Emperor's name. But when he discovered what happened to conquered populations after the celebrations ended, the re-education camps, the genetic modification programs, the systematic erasure of cultures, he couldn't remain silent. He took his fleet, 300 ships and their crews, and declared rebellion. And you? Jake had asked. What's your role in all this? I was supposed to be the bridge, she'd said bitterly. The Emperor's son, Prince Theron, was my intended husband. A political marriage to bind my father's loyalty even tighter to the throne. But when my father rebelled, I chose to join him rather than marry into tyranny. I stole evidence of the Emperor's crimes, files, recordings, testimonies from survivors, and fled to find allies. She'd looked at Jake with those impossible eyes. Your planet was supposed to be a way station, somewhere I could hide long enough to contact the Free Worlds Coalition. But the Sentinels tracked me faster than I expected. Now, standing in the dusty street, Jake understood that he'd become part of something far larger than himself. The choice he'd made yesterday wasn't just about saving one person. It was about taking a stand in a war that spanned the stars. The Sentinel ship descended at precisely sunrise, its shadow falling across the town like the hand of fate. Krelvar emerged first, followed by his 6 warriors, their armor gleaming in the morning light. But something was different about them now. They carried no weapons, wore no symbols of imperial authority. They had stripped themselves down to simple armor, a sign Jake didn't yet understand but sensed was significant. The Sentinels formed a line in the street. Facing Jake and Lyra, Krelvar stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire town with a power that needed no amplification. Humans of this world, witness what occurs here today. Witness what has not occurred in 3,000 years of Empire history. A human, Jake Morrison of Redemption Creek, has invoked the right of Arkith through his actions of selfless courage and unbreakable honor. By the ancient laws that govern all Krill warriors, by the codes written into our very souls, we acknowledge him. Then, in a movement that seemed to shake the earth itself, all 7 Sentinels dropped to one knee before Jake. Their massive forms bowed, their heads lowered, their fists placed over their hearts in the universal gesture of respect. Jake heard gasps from the crowd, heard someone old Tom Bradley, he thought, whisper, "Lord have mercy." He stood frozen, unable to process the sight of these powerful alien warriors kneeling before him, a simple cowboy who'd never been anybody important in his entire life. "Jake Morrison," Krelvar continued, his voice resonating with harmonics that seemed to reach into Jake's chest. "You are hereby recognized as a keeper of the ancient way, a title that grants you respect among all who still honor the old codes. You are under our protection, and through you, so is Princess Lyra. Any who would harm you must first answer to every honorable warrior in the Empire." But before Jake could respond, before he could even begin to form words adequate to this moment, something happened that no one expected. The sky tore open. That was the only way Jake could describe it. One moment the sky was normal. The next it split like fabric, revealing a swirling vortex of impossible colors. Through that tear in reality came another ship, smaller than the Sentinel vessel, but moving with predatory speed. It dove toward the town, and Jake recognized the sigil on its hull from Lyra's descriptions. The Emperor's personal seal. "No," Lyra whispered beside him, her face going pale. "They've sent the Void Talons, elite assassins. They're not bound by the old codes, Krelvar. They serve only the Emperor's will." The Sentinels rose as one, their earlier reverence transforming instantly into battle readiness. Krelvar's face twisted into something between anger and resignation. "So he sends the dishonored ones, those who have forsaken the ancient ways. He seeks to circumvent our acknowledgement with those who recognize no law but his word." The assassin ship landed hard in the street, its hull opening to disgorge figures that made even the Sentinels look approachable. These Krill were different, leaner, darker, their armor black as space itself and covered with what looked dried blood. Their eyes held no mercury reflection, only empty darkness that seemed to swallow light. There were 12 of them, and they moved with a fluidity that spoke of countless kills, of violence elevated to art form. Their leader stepped forward, a female with scars that crisscrossed her face like a roadmap of violence. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the harmonics of normal Krill speech. It was flat, dead, terrifying in its lack of emotion. "Princess Lyra of the 7th House, you are called to answer for treason against the Emperor. Come peacefully and your death will be swift. Resist, and we will paint this primitive town with blood starting, with the human who dares stand beside you." Jake felt the moment crystallize, felt every choice he'd ever made leading him to this point. He could step aside, let them take Lyra, save the town from becoming a battlefield. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice, the one that would let him go back to his quiet life shoeing horses and drinking whiskey in the evening shade. But Jake Morrison had never been good at making smart choices. "Lady," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins, "I took 10 lashes to keep this girl safe. You think I'm gonna hand her over now, just because you show up with more friends and nastier looks?" He took a step forward, placing himself between the assassins and Lyra. "You want her. You go through me first." The assassin leader tilted her head, studying him like a bug under glass. "You are nothing human. You will die in seconds, and your death will accomplish nothing." "Maybe so," Jake agreed. "But I'll die standing, and that's more than I can say for those who follow tyrants." Behind him, he heard Krelvar make a sound of approval, heard the sentinels moving into defensive positions around him. Beside him, Lyra raised her hands, energy beginning to crackle between her fingers. Apparently, princesses of the 7th house weren't entirely helpless, and around them something unexpected happened. The people of Redemption Creek, simple farmers and shopkeepers and saloon workers, began picking up whatever weapons they could find. Old Tom Bradley emerged from his forge with a hammer that could dent steel. Young Billy Thornton held his father's rifle with shaking hands. Mrs. Chun appeared with her meat cleaver, muttering prayers and curses in equal measure. The assassin leader looked around at this ragtag assembly of humans and honor-bound sentinels, at this impossible alliance forming around one cowboy and one alien princess, and for the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her scarred face. "Last chance, human. Stand aside." Jake smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Come and take her." The battle that followed would be remembered in human and Krill history for centuries to come. The day a frontier town stood against an empire as assassins and discovered that courage, once ignited, can spread like wildfire across the stars. The first assassin to move died before completing their second step. Krelvar, moving with speed that defied his massive size, intercepted the Void Talon with a strike that would have decapitated a lesser being. The assassin's head remained attached, but barely, dark blood spraying across the dusty street. The sentinel warrior stood over the body, his voice carrying across the chaos that was about to erupt. "The right has been acknowledged. To break it is to forfeit honor and life. Who else wishes to test the ancient ways?" The answer came in violence. The remaining 11 assassins attacked simultaneously, moving like shadows made flesh. They were faster than the sentinels, their movements enhanced by technology and genetic modifications that had stripped away their connection to the old codes but granted them terrifying efficiency. One moment they were standing together. The next, they had dispersed across the street, each seeking targets with predatory precision. Jake found himself face to face with one of them before he could even draw the pistol from his holster. The assassin's blade, some kind of energy weapon that hummed like a swarm of angry wasps, swept toward his throat with lethal intent. He would have died in that instant if not for Lyra. The princess moved between them, her hands erupting with the same crackling energy Jake had seen building earlier. She caught the blade on a shield of pure force, the impact sending shockwaves through the air that shattered windows in the nearby buildings. Her voice, when she spoke, carried an authority that reminded everyone present that she was indeed royalty, trained in arts humans couldn't begin to understand. "I am Lyra, daughter of General Thornrex, inheritor of the 7th House's combat traditions, and I will not hide behind others while they fight my battles." She pushed forward, driving the assassin back with pulses of energy that left scorch marks in the dirt. Jake Morrison took my punishment. Now I fight beside him. Around them, the battle exploded into chaos. The sentinels engaged the assassins in combat that moved almost too fast for human eyes to track. their massive forms somehow keeping pace with the darker, quicker void talons. Krelvar fought like a force of nature, each strike powerful enough to crack stone. But even he was hard-pressed against opponents who had been bred and trained specifically to kill warriors like him. The townspeople did what they could, which was more than Jake expected. Old Tom Bradley's hammer caught one assassin in the knee, the impact producing a crack that was distinctly satisfying. The creature turned on him with murder in its empty eyes, only to take a meat cleaver to the shoulder from Mrs. Chun, who appeared from nowhere, with a war cry in Cantonese that would have been impressive even without the blade. They couldn't kill the enhanced warriors, but they could harry them, distract them, buy precious seconds for the sentinels to press their advantages. Jake drew his revolver and fired at the assassin Lyra was fighting, the bullet striking true but bouncing off armor that earth metallurgy couldn't hope to penetrate. Still, the impact distracted the creature long enough for Lyra to land a devastating blow, her energy-wreathed fist connecting with its chest and sending it flying backward into the wall of the saloon hard enough to leave a crater. "Behind you," Billy Thornton's voice cut through the noise. Jake spun, his body moving on instincts honed by years of survival, but he wasn't fast enough. An assassin's blade caught him across the ribs, the energy weapon slicing through leather and skin like they were paper. Pain exploded through his side, white-hot and immediate, but Jake had learned something about pain in the past 24 hours. He de-learned that it didn't have to stop him. He brought his pistol up and fired point-blank into the assassin's face. The bullet didn't penetrate its armor or skull, but the impact at that range was enough to stagger it, to buy him the seconds he needed to stumble backward. Lyra was there instantly, interposing herself between Jake and his attacker, her defensive shields flaring bright enough to make everyone blink. "I won't let you die for me again," she said, her voice fierce with determination. And something else, something that sounded like the beginning of a bond deeper than gratitude. The tide of battle shifted in those moments, not because of superior firepower or numbers, but because of something the assassins couldn't account for: unity born of shared purpose. The sentinels, the princess, the cowboy, and the townspeople fought not as separate entities, but as a single force, each protecting the others, each sacrifice buying time for someone else to strike. Krelvar, bleeding from a dozen wounds, managed to crush another assassin beneath his massive hands, the sound of breaking exoskeleton echoing across the street. Two more fell to coordinated strikes from his fellow sentinels, warriors who had fought together for decades and moved now with perfect synchronization. Lyra's energy attacks kept three assassins occupied, her royal training evident in every precisely calculated blast. But numbers and biology eventually matter. The assassins were winning through attrition, their enhanced bodies healing damage that would have killed sentinels, their relentless attacks finding gaps in defenses worn thin by exhaustion. One sentinel fell, then another, their massive forms crashing to the earth. Tom Bradley went down clutching a burned shoulder. Mrs. Chun collapsed, her leg cut from under her. Jake, bleeding from multiple wounds now, his vision swimming with pain and blood loss, found himself back to back with Lyra in the center of the street. 6 assassins circled them, their leader watching from a distance with empty, patient eyes. Krelvar and 2 other sentinels still fought at the perimeter, but they were surrounded, overwhelmed. "I'm sorry," Jake gasped, his hand pressed to the worst wound in his side, blood flowing between his fingers. I thought we had a chance." "We did," Lyra replied, her own breath coming in ragged gasps, her energy shields flickering as her strength waned. "We do, because you taught me something today, Jake Morrison. You taught me that one person taking a stand, making an impossible choice, can change everything. That's what my father believes. That's why he fights." "Pretty words," the assassin leader called out, "but they won't save you. Surrender now, princess, and I'll make his death quick." Jake felt Lyra tense beside him, felt her preparing for one final attack, a desperate gambit that would likely kill her even if it succeeded. He couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let this girl who carried hope for millions die here in the dust of Redemption Creek. He was searching for words, for some way to change the ending of this story, when the sky began to sing. It started as a vibration, a harmonic that resonated in his bones, then built into a sound that defied description, like 1,000 voices joined in perfect unity, like the music of stars being born. The assassins froze, their empty eyes showing something Jake had never seen in them before: fear. Through the clouds descended not one ship, but hundreds. They came in formation, their hulls bearing colors and symbols from dozens of different species, different worlds, different civilizations. At their head flew a vessel larger than any Jake had seen, its design distinctly Krill but modified, its hull painted not in imperial colors, but in the deep crimson of rebellion. The lead ship opened a communication channel, and a voice boomed across Redemption Creek, a voice that carried the same harmonic qualities as Lyra's but deeper, weighted with authority and years of command. "This is General Thornrex of the Free Fleet, father to Princess Lyra of the Seventh House. All hostile forces are ordered to stand down immediately. You are surrounded by 300 warships, representing 47 liberated worlds. Surrender, or be reduced to atoms." The assassin leader looked up at the sky, her scarred face calculating odds that no longer favored her. Around the perimeter of town, Jake could see more ships landing, disgorging soldiers, not just Krill, but species he'd never seen before, a rainbow coalition of beings united against tyranny. Lyra sagged against Jake, laughter and tears mixing together. "He found me," she whispered. "He followed my distress beacon. Father found me." Krelvar, battered but unbowed, limped toward the center of the street. "By the ancient codes and the laws of honorable warfare, this battle is concluded. Void Talons, you are defeated. Surrender your weapons and you will be treated according to the customs of war." For a moment, the assassin leader stood frozen, weighing options in that dead-eyed way of hers. Then, slowly, she knelt and placed her blade on the ground. Her remaining warriors followed suit, 8 killers brought to heel not by superior force alone, but by the inescapable mathematics of overwhelming opposition. The largest ship landed at the edge of town, and from it emerged a figure that needed no introduction. General Thornrex stood nearly as tall as the sentinels, but there was something different about him, a warmth in those mercury eyes, a nobility in his bearing that spoke of a warrior who fought for principles rather than power. His armor bore the scars of 100 battles, and when he saw Lyra, his stern expression crumbled into pure relief. "My daughter," he said, striding forward with arms outstretched. Lyra ran to him, and Jake watched as the general commander of a rebel fleet terror of the Empire, one of the most wanted beings in the galaxy, hugged his daughter with the tender desperation of any father who thought his child lost forever. After a long moment, Thornrex released Lyra and turned his attention to the scene before him, the wounded townspeople, the battered sentinels, and at the center of it all, one bleeding cowboy who was using his pistol to keep himself upright. "You must be Jake Morrison," the general said, approaching with measured steps. "My daughter's distress beacon included a recording of what transpired yesterday. I watched a human take 10 lashes from a neural whip without breaking. I watched sentinels kneel before him in acknowledgement of the ancient rite, and now I arrive, to find him standing against Void Talons to protect her still." He stopped before Jake, stunning him with an intensity that made the cowboy want to squirm. "You are either the bravest being I have ever encountered, or the most foolish. Probably both, sir," Jake managed, his voice weak but steady. Thornrex surprised him by laughing, a sound that carried genuine warmth. "An honest answer. I respect that." He turned to address everyone present, his own soldiers, the sentinels, the townspeople. "What happened here today will be recorded in the histories of the rebellion. A human with no stake in our war, no reason to risk his life, stood against an empire because it was the right thing to do. He inspired others to stand with him. Sentinels who chose honor over orders. Civilians who chose courage over safety. This is what we fight for. This is why we will win. He placed a massive hand on Jake's shoulder, surprisingly gentle given the strength it must contain. Jake Morrison, you have done more for our cause in 2 days than some of our agents have accomplished in years. You've reminded warriors across this sector what the ancient codes truly mean. You've given the Empire's soldiers reason to question their orders. And you've saved my daughter's life. His expression grew serious. I owe you a debt that cannot be easily repaid. Jake shook his head, immediately regretting the movement as dizziness washed over him. You don't owe me anything, General. I did what anyone should do when they see someone in trouble, but most don't. Lyra interjected, moving to Jake's other side to help support him. Most look away, tell themselves it's not their problem, convince themselves that one person can't make a difference. You didn't, and because you didn't, everything changed. Medics were swarming now. Alien doctors with technology that made Earth medicine look like witchcraft in reverse. They began treating the wounded, both human and crew, with efficiency that spoke of too much practice at battlefield triage. Jake felt devices being pressed to his wounds, felt the pain beginning to recede as whatever advanced healing they possessed knitted flesh and stopped bleeding. Krelvar approached, limping but alive, his armor cracked but his spirit unbroken. He knelt before the general, his fist over his heart. Commander Thorn Rex, I and my warriors request permission to join the Free Fleet. We can no longer serve an emperor who sends dishonored assassins to circumvent the ancient codes. We can no longer enforce laws that contradict the very foundations of what it means to be Krill. Thorn Rex regarded the sentinel with an expression that might have been surprise. You would abandon your posts, your oaths to the Empire, based on what happened here? The Empire abandoned its oaths first, Krelvar replied firmly. The codes we swear to uphold, the honor we are bred to protect, these are older and more sacred than any emperor's decree. Jake Morrison reminded us of that truth. We will not forget it again. The general nodded slowly, accepting this with the gravity it deserved. Then you are welcome in our ranks, Sentinel Krelvar. We can always use warriors who remember what honor means. As medical teams worked and soldiers secured the area as the sun climbed higher over Redemption Creek, and the impossible became simply the reality of the day. Jake found himself sitting on the steps of the general store, Lyra beside him watching history unfold in his small frontier town. What happens now? He asked quietly. To you, to your father, to all of this. Lyra was silent for a moment, her golden-flecked eyes distant. Now we continue the fight. We take the evidence I carry to the Free Worlds Coalition, prove to the galaxy what the Emperor truly is. We build alliances, liberate more systems, give hope to those who have none. She turned to him, and in her gaze, he saw both sorrow and determination. And you, Jake Morrison, you have a choice to make. What choice is that? The right of Arketh binds us until you release me or one of us dies. You could end it now. Send me away with my father. Return to your life here. No one would blame you. You've done more than anyone could ask. She paused, and Jake heard the unspoken hope in her voice. Or you could come with us. The rebellion needs people like you, not because you're a fighter or a soldier, but because you're proof that courage exists in the most unexpected places. You're a symbol now, whether you wanted to be or not. Jake looked out at his town, at the people who'd stood with him, at the life he built here after running from his past. It was a good life, a quiet life, the kind of life a man could grow old in without regrets. But he'd learned something in these past 2 days, something that Lyra's sacrifice and Krelvar's honor and his own actions had taught him. Quiet lives were in for everyone, and some calls couldn't be ignored. I reckon, he said slowly, a smile tugging at his lips, that I've never been much good at making sensible choices. And staying here, knowing what I know now, seeing what I've seen, that'd be the sensible choice, wouldn't it? Lyra's face lit up with a joy that made her seem younger, less burdened. Are you saying ... I'm saying that if you're bound to me by this right thing, then I'd better come along to make sure you don't get into more trouble. Someone's got to keep an eye on you rebel types. He stood, wincing at the protest from healing wounds. Besides, I've got a feeling this is going to be one hell of a story. The weeks that followed Jake's decision to join the rebellion passed in a blur of impossible sights and experiences. He traveled aboard the General's flagship, a vessel so vast it contained entire ecosystems within its walls, forests, and lakes under artificial skies. He met beings from worlds whose names he couldn't pronounce, learned about technologies that made his head spin, and discovered that the universe was far larger and more complex than his wildest dreams had imagined. But more than the wonders of space travel or alien civilizations, Jake learned about the war itself, the real war, the one fought not just with ships and weapons, but with ideas and hope. Thorn Rex's rebellion wasn't simply a military campaign. It was a movement built on the belief that all sentient beings deserved freedom, that empires built on subjugation were inherently corrupt, that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak rather than exploit them. He watched as the evidence Lyra had stolen was presented to the Free Worlds Coalition, a gathering of independent systems that had resisted imperial expansion. The recordings she carried testimonies from survivors, documentation of genocides, proof of the Emperor's systematic erasure of entire cultures shocked even hardened diplomats into silence. Within days, 12 more systems pledged support to the rebellion, their fleets joining Thorn Rex's growing armada. Jake's role in all this surprised him. He wasn't a strategist or a soldier or a diplomat. But Thorn Rex had been right. He was a symbol. The story of the human cowboy who took 10 lashes for an alien princess, who stood against assassins with nothing but courage and a rusty pistol, spread across the rebellion like wildfire. It was told in 1,000 languages on 100 worlds, always with the same message. One person's choice can change everything. He spoke at rallies, his simple words about doing what's right resonating with beings who'd grown cynical about the possibility of victory. He trained with the rebellion's fighters, teaching them not combat techniques. They were far beyond him in that regard, but something more valuable. The importance of fighting for something rather than just against something. And he stood beside Lyra as she grew into her role not just as a princess, but as a leader in her own right. Her compassion and intelligence winning hearts that military victories alone never could. Kralvar and his sentinels became some of Jake's closest companions, the massive warriors treating him with a respect that still felt unearned, but which he'd learned to accept. They taught him their combat forms, adapted for human physiology, and in return, he taught them poker, a cultural exchange that resulted in several diplomatic incidents when the Sentinels got too good at bluffing. 3 months after the battle at Redemption Creek, the rebellion achieved its first major victory, the liberation of Talos IV, an industrial world that had been strip-mined to fuel the Imperial war machine. Jake stood on the bridge of the flagship as they entered the system, watched as the planet's enslaved population rose up to join their liberators, and understood that this was what Lyra's father had been fighting for all along. But victory came with a price. The Emperor, enraged by the rebellion's growing success and the defection of warriors like Kralvar, declared Jake Morrison an enemy of the state. His face, the face of a simple cowboy from Earth, was now broadcast across the Empire alongside Thorn Rex and Lyra, marked for death with a bounty that could buy entire star systems. "Does it bother you?" Lyra asked him one evening as they stood in the observation deck, watching stars stream past at faster than light speeds. "Being hunted by an empire, knowing you can never go home again?" Jake considered the question carefully. Redemption Creek seemed like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been months. He thought about his Mari, left in old Tom Bradley's care, He thought about the saloon where he'd spent quiet evenings, about the simple rhythm of shoeing horses and watching sunsets. He thought about the man he'd been before all this, a man running from his past, hiding in a quiet town, trying to forget the things he'd done and failed to do. "I was running when I came to Redemption Creek," he said finally. "Running from a war I couldn't stop, from friends I couldn't save, from a version of myself I didn't like very much. I thought if I just got far enough away, made myself small enough, I could escape that person." He turned to look at her, this alien princess who had somehow become one of the most important people in his life. "But you can't escape yourself, Lyra. You can only decide what kind of person you're going to be going forward." She smiled, and in that smile, Jake saw the same determination he'd seen when she stood between him and the assassin's blade. "And what kind of person have you decided to be?" "The kind who doesn't look away," Jake replied. "The kind who stands up even when it's stupid, even when it's dangerous, even when every sensible part of him says to run. Your father was right. I'm either the bravest or most foolish being he's ever met. Probably both. But I'm okay with that." Their conversation was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the ship. Krelvar's voice came over the communication system. "All hands to battle stations. Imperial fleet detected. 40 warships bearing down on our position." "They found us." Jake and Lyra raced to the bridge, where Thornrex stood studying tactical displays with the calm intensity of a chess master planning his moves. The general looked up as they entered, his expression grave but not defeated. "The Emperor sent his third fleet," he explained. "They've been hunting us for weeks. We can fight, but we're outnumbered and outgunned. Or we can run, scatter the fleet, and regroup later." He looked at his daughter, then at Jake. "What do you think, Morrison? You've become one of my most trusted advisors, whether you intended to or not. How do we play this?" Jake walked to the tactical display, studying the arrangement of ships, theirs in blue, the Empire's in red. He wasn't a military strategist, had no business making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. But he'd learned something in these months, something that all his new friends and allies had taught him. Sometimes the outsider's perspective was exactly what was needed. "General, if we run, the Empire wins without firing a shot. They prove to everyone watching that the rebellion can be scattered, that we'll always choose survival over confrontation." He pointed at the display. "But if we fight and lose, that's even worse. We hand them a decisive victory, prove their superiority." He paused, an idea forming. "What if we do something they don't expect? What if we talk to them?" Thornrex's eyebrows rose. "Talk? Morrison, these are Imperial warriors. They've been ordered to destroy us." "I know," Jake said. "But Krelvar and his sentinels were Imperial warriors too. They changed sides because someone reminded them what honor really means. There have to be others in that fleet who've heard the stories, who've seen the evidence we've been spreading, who's starting to question their orders." He met the general's gaze steadily. "What if we broadcast? Not a surrender, not a play, but a challenge. We tell them the truth about what they're fighting for. Give them a chance to choose differently. Best case, some of them defect. Worst case, we've planted seeds of doubt that will grow even if we have to retreat." Lyra touched her father's arm. "He's right. That's what this whole rebellion is about, giving people the truth and trusting them to make the right choice. We can't fight an empire with ships alone. We have to fight it with ideas." Thornrex was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded. "Open a communication channel. Broadcast on all frequencies. Let's see if the Empire's warriors are ready to hear some uncomfortable truths." The channel opened, and Thornrex spoke not as a rebel commander to enemies, but as one warrior to others. He spoke of the evidence they'd gathered, of the atrocities committed in the Emperor's name, of the civilizations erased and the cultures destroyed. He spoke of honor and duty, of the difference between following orders and doing what's right. And then he did something unprecedented. "I'm going to transmit files to your ships," he said. "Not weapons, not viruses, just information. Testimonies from survivors, records from conquered worlds, proof of what our empire has become. Review them. Share them with your crews. Then decide for yourselves whether you want to fight for that or whether you want to stand for something better. You have 2 hours." "We'll wait." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Officers looked at each other with uncertainty, wondering if they'd just made a brilliant strategic move or a fatal mistake. Jake stood beside Lyra, their hands finding each other without conscious thought, both of them understanding that the next 2 hours would determine not just their fate, but potentially the fate of the entire rebellion. Time passed with agonizing slowness. 1 hour, 90 minutes. The Imperial fleet held position, their weapons powered, but not firing, their ships silent as they presumably reviewed the transmitted information and debated among themselves. Then, at 1 hour and 53 minutes, something miraculous happened. One ship, mid-sized cruiser from the Imperial formation, broke ranks. It moved slowly, deliberately, positioning itself between the rebel fleet and the rest of the Imperial ships. A communication request came through. "This is Captain Zoncora of the ICS Relentless. I have reviewed your evidence. I have shared it with my crew. We have voted." A pause, heavy with the weight of consequences. "We can no longer serve an empire that commits such atrocities. We request permission to join the Free Fleet." Before Thornrex could respond, another ship broke formation. Then another. Then 5 more. Like dominoes falling, like a dam breaking, like the first cracks in a wall that would eventually crumble, Imperial ships began defecting. Not all of them, about half the fleet held position. Their commanders either too loyal or too afraid to make the leap. But 15 warships, carrying thousands of Imperial soldiers, chose rebellion over tyranny in a single moment of collective conscience. The remaining Imperial ships, now outnumbered and outgunned, retreated without firing a shot. The rebellion had won without violence, through nothing more than truth and the willingness to trust others to make the right choice when given complete information. Jake watched it all unfold with a sense of wonder that hadn't dimmed despite months of miracles. Beside him, Lyra was crying, not tears of sadness but of joy, of validation, of hope realized. Thornrex stood motionless, his expression one of profound satisfaction, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of vindication. "This is how we win," he said quietly. "Not battle by battle, but conscience by conscience. Morrison, you've given us something more valuable than any weapon. You've given us a strategy that actually works." The celebrations lasted well into the ship's artificial night, aliens and humans, mingling together former enemies, embracing as new allies. The rebellion S-ranks swelled not just by ships, but by the most valuable resource any movement can have: true believers in the cause. Later, much later, Jake found himself back in the observation deck, watching the stars in companionable silence with Lyra. The rite of Arketh still bound them, though it had become less a magical obligation and more a simple truth. They were bound by choice now, by shared experiences and common purpose in something deeper that neither had quite put words to yet. "Do you ever wonder how it all would have turned out if you just walked away that day?" Lyra asked softly. "If you'd let them whip me, let them execute me, gone back to your simple life?" Jake thought about it, about the infinite branching possibilities of choices not made. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I think about everything that's happened since. The warriors who've found their honor again, the systems that have been liberated, the lives that have been saved. All because one person decided to do something instead of nothing." He turned to her, seeing not just an alien princess, but a partner, a friend, someone worth taking 10 lashes for and 1,000 more if needed. "I don't know if I'm a good person, Lyra. I've done things in my past I'm not proud of. But I know that day in Redemption Creek, I made the right choice. And I've been trying to make the right choice every day since." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed impossible that first day when she was just a prisoner and he was just a cowboy. "You asked me once what role I played in my father's rebellion. I told you I was supposed to be a bridge, a political tool. But I've discovered my real role. I'm supposed to help you change the galaxy, one impossible choice at a time." And in that moment, watching the stars stream past while a rebellion grew stronger behind them, Jake Morrison understood that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all those years ago when he fled to Redemption Creek. Not peace. The rebellion would bring anything but peace. Not safety. Every day brought new dangers, new enemies, new battles to fight. No, what he'd found was purpose. What he'd found was the chance to matter, to stand for something, to write a story worth telling. He'd found a place where his scars, both the old ones and the new ones he'd earned taking those 10 lashes, meant something more than just pain endured. He'd found, in the most unexpected way possible, redemption. The war against the Empire would continue for years to come. There would be victories and defeats, losses and triumphs, moments of darkness and flashes of brilliant hope. Jake Morrison would fight in battles across a dozen star systems, would help liberate worlds whose names he could barely pronounce, would become a legend whispered in 1,000 languages. The human who stood against an empire and taught warriors the true meaning of honor. But he would always trace it back to this beginning, to a dusty street in Redemption Creek, where a cowboy made an impossible choice and discovered that sometimes, just sometimes, one person really could change everything. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and indifferent, but Jake Morrison and Princess Lyra stood beneath them as proof that in a vast, cold universe, warmth and courage and compassion could still find a way to shine. And somewhere on 100 rebel worlds, in 1,000 resistance cells, among millions who dared to dream of freedom, they told the story of the cowboy and the princess, a reminder that heroes aren't born in palaces or trained in military academies. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who decide, in a crucial moment, to do the right thing even when it costs them everything. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the galaxy.